There is another way to experience your life. What if the feeling of being separate and alone is not the final truth, but just a story you have learned to tell yourself? By the end of this story, you will understand how to access a profound and unshakable sense of connection that changes everything. We will explore how a simple shift in awareness can dissolve the walls you never knew you built, and why true peace might be found not by adding something to your life, but by letting an old idea of yourself fall away. What is the one thing you feel is truly separating you from the world around you? He wakes each morning to the same low hum of anxiety, a familiar tension that greets him before his eyes even open. His name is Leo, and his life looks perfectly normal from the outside. He navigates traffic, answers emails, and attends meetings, all with a quiet competence that fools nearly everyone. But inside, a relentless current of pressure flows through his day. The pressure to perform, to provide, to be someone. He scrolls through social media and sees a world of connection he cannot seem to touch, a gallery of smiles that feel a million miles away. At the supermarket, he stands in line surrounded by people, yet he feels utterly alone, a solitary island in a sea of humanity. The most persistent sound in his life is not the city outside his window, but a quiet inner whisper. It speaks in the gaps between tasks, in the stillness before sleep. It asks a single, haunting question. Is this really all there is? This whisper is not loud or dramatic. It is the subtle ache for a meaning that his to-do list cannot provide, a longing for a peace that does not depend on his next achievement or purchase. It is the faint but undeniable sense that he was made for something more than just managing the chaos. And perhaps you have heard a whisper like this too. He found it not in a grand event, but in a simple crack of his own exhaustion. One evening, after a day that had blurred into a gray smear of tasks, Leo stood at his kitchen sink, washing a single coffee mug. The warm water ran over his hands, and he watched the soap bubbles gather and vanish. He was so tired that the usual mental commentary, the endless list of what he had to do next, simply stopped. His gaze drifted through the window to the old oak tree in his backyard. The last light of the sun was catching its leaves, setting them on fire with a deep, impossible gold. He wasn't just looking at the tree. For a single, breathtaking moment, he was the tree. The hard edge of himself, the Leo he carried around like a heavy suit, simply dissolved. There was no separation between the warmth in his hands, the brilliant light on the leaves, and the quiet peace that filled his chest. There was just one seamless, living moment. It was not a thought, it was a feeling, a deep and wordless knowing that he belonged to this, that he was a part of this vast, breathing world, not a visitor to it. The feeling lasted only as long as it took for a single leaf to tremble in the breeze and fall, but its echo remained. The whisper of isolation was gone, replaced by a profound and startling silence. What if that moment of unity, however brief, was not an accident? What if it was a glimpse of a truth that was always there, waiting just beneath the surface of his busy mind? The echo of that moment under the oak tree refused to fade. It lingered in Leo's mind like a forgotten melody, and he found himself searching for its source, not in the world but within himself. A few days later, he was taking out his recycling when he noticed his elderly neighbor, Mr. Evans, carefully tending a small patch of herbs on his balcony. The man moved with a slow, deliberate grace that stood in stark contrast to Leo's own frantic pace. Their eyes met, and Mr. Evans gave a simple, knowing nod, as if he could see the quiet turmoil behind Leo's polite smile. This was not a dramatic meeting of a sage on a mountaintop. It was an ordinary encounter that would become the catalyst for an extraordinary shift. Leo began stopping by more often, initially under the pretense of asking about gardening. Mr. Evans never offered lectures or easy answers. Instead, he asked questions that landed with the weight of stones in a still pond. One afternoon, as they sat watching sparrows dart between the branches, the old man turned to Leo. "You speak of feeling separate," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But tell me, when you feel the sun on your skin, where does your body end and the warmth begin? Is there a line you can point to?" Leo started to formulate an intellectual answer, but the question was not meant for his mind. It was an invitation to feel, to experience directly. He fell silent, truly considering the sensation. The warmth seemed to permeate him without asking for permission or respecting any boundary. Another time, after Leo expressed his frustration with the constant pressure to succeed, Mr. Evans gestured to a cup of tea between them. "Is the cup separate from the space inside it?" he asked, "or are they one thing, working together to hold the tea? You are so focused on the clay of yourself, you forget the empty space that gives it function and connection." These were not riddles meant to confuse. They were precise tools, gently applied to the seams of Leo's perceived separation, encouraging him to look closer at his own experience. The mentor was not building a new philosophy in the student, but patiently dismantling the old one, brick by brick. And with each question, the walls around Leo's world grew just a little thinner, allowing a new kind of light to seep through. One afternoon, the teaching became perfectly clear. Mr. Evans did not use the word ego, a term that can feel heavy and complicated. He simply called it the story of me. He explained that this sense of being a separate, isolated self is not a solid thing you are born with, but a thought pattern you learn, a story you have been telling yourself for so long that you have come to believe it is the only truth. "Consider a single wave in the ocean," he said, his eyes reflecting the sky. "The wave has a unique shape, a brief and beautiful life. It can rise high and feel powerful, or crash low and feel defeated. It might look at other waves and feel envy or competition. It might fear its own end as it approaches the shore, but is the wave ever truly separate from the ocean? Its very substance is ocean. Its movement is the ocean's movement. Its existence is an expression of the ocean itself. The belief in its separation is the source of all its fear and struggle, for it is fighting an imaginary battle against its own vast nature." Or think of a character in a movie you are watching. The character might experience joy and sorrow, victory and loss. It lives entirely within its own drama. But if that character could turn around and look, it would see that its entire world is projected onto a single, seamless screen. The screen is the silent, constant foundation for every explosion, every whisper, every tear. The character, lost in its own story, completely forgets the screen is even there. This is the root of our own quiet suffering. We are so completely absorbed in the drama of our personal story, the chronicle of our wants and fears, our successes and failures, that we forget the vast, aware space in which this story is merely appearing. We believe the thoughts that say "I am not enough" or "I am alone," and we build our entire lives around defending this fragile character we think we are. This creates a constant, low-grade friction with life itself. You feel you must control everything because you perceive everything as outside of you. You feel threatened by change because your story feels solid and permanent. You feel a deep, persistent loneliness because you believe you are a single wave, unaware that you are the entire ocean. But understanding the story of me is one thing, stepping out of it is another. Leo's mentor knew that a new idea was not enough. The shift had to be felt in the bones, not just thought about in the mind. So he gave Leo a simple instruction, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of his own thoughts. He told him to stop trying to change anything and to start noticing everything. The first practice was as ordinary as breathing. "Sit for just 5 minutes," he said, "and do not try to control your breath. Simply feel the air as it enters your body, cool at the nostrils. Feel the gentle expansion in your chest and belly. Feel the warm release as it leaves. Do not judge it as good or bad. Do not wish it were deeper or calmer. Just be the one who is aware of the breath, the silent witness to this most fundamental rhythm of life." At first, Leo's mind rebelled. It was a riot of planning and remembering. He felt foolish sitting there doing nothing, But then, for a single cycle, he succeeded. He felt the full, complete sensation of one in-breath and one out-breath without commentary. And in that tiny gap, the noisy world of his problems seemed to step back just an inch. It was a space, a profound and quiet peace he had never noticed was always there. The second practice was to feel the body. As he walked to his car, his mentor had told him, "Drop your attention from the thoughts racing in your head and feel the physical reality of your feet touching the ground. Feel the pressure in your soles, the swing of your arms, the breeze on your skin." For 20 steps he tried. He felt the solid support of the earth, the aliveness in his legs. He was no longer just a head full of worries carried by a body. He was a whole, sensing being, walking, breathing, and feeling. The world became more vivid, more immediate. The third practice was to truly listen. Instead of waiting for his turn to speak in a conversation, he tried just listening to the sound of the other person's voice. He listened to the hum of his computer, the distant chirp of a bird, not as distractions but as the very soundtrack of the present moment. In this simple, focused attention, something subtle began to change. The feeling of being a solid, separate self inside his head began to soften. He wasn't a thinker having sensations. He was the awareness in which thinking and sensing were both happening. The boundary between the feeler and the felt started to blur, just as it had under the oak tree. This is the secret gateway. Awakening is not a distant, mystical event. It is the simple, radical act of coming home to the felt reality of this moment, exactly as it is. The story of me thrives on the past and the future. It cannot survive your full, undivided attention on the here and now. What sound can you hear right now if you stop and simply listen without naming it? The practice of noticing began to reshape Leo's world from the inside out. He felt less like a person trapped inside his skull and more like a wide, open space in which life simply happened. But his mentor gently pointed out a lingering shadow. "You have learned to feel the life in your own body," he said. "Now, can you learn to see that same life in the body of another?" This was the next and perhaps most challenging step. It began with someone easy. Leo sat with his sister who was telling a story about her day. Instead of just listening to her words, he tried a new kind of looking. He let his focus soften, and he simply noticed the light in her eyes, the animation in her hands, the subtle shifts in her expression. He wasn't just seeing his sister anymore. He was seeing aliveness itself, an energy that was familiar. It was the same vibrant presence he felt when he was fully present, the same awareness that witnessed his own thoughts. The love he felt for her in that moment was not for her personality or her stories, but for the shared consciousness looking out from behind her eyes. Then he tried it with a stranger. Standing in line at a coffee shop, he observed the barista. He watched the focused intention in her movements as she steamed the milk, the slight smile she offered each customer. He saw not a stranger performing a job, but a unique expression of the same universal intelligence that designed the spiraling galaxy and the branching tree. Her form was different, her story was her own, but the essential life animating her was not separate from the life animating him. The feeling of other began to waver. The real test came with a colleague he often found difficult. This man was often abrupt and critical, and Leo usually braced himself for their interactions, his own story of me feeling threatened and defensive. Remembering his mentor's guidance, Leo decided to try seeing him not as a difficult person, but as a wave in the same ocean. He looked past the man's sharp words and tense posture, and for a fleeting second, he saw not an adversary, but a manifestation of life that was suffering, caught in the grip of its own separate self-story, just as he had been. He saw the same fundamental desire for peace and the same fear of not being enough that he knew so well in himself. In that moment, the solid boundary between us and them simply dissolved. There was no one to defend against because the struggle was recognized as universal. This was not about condoning bad behavior or becoming a passive doormat. It was a shift in perception so profound it changed the entire field of relationship. When you look at another and see the same consciousness that you are, judgment softens into compassion. You realize that every person you meet is, at their core, the one awareness pretending to be separate, playing a temporary role in this vast and interconnected drama. The person who cuts you off in traffic, the child laughing in the park, the elderly woman feeding pigeons on a bench, they are all you in another form. The sense of isolation that once felt so heavy was being replaced by a quiet, unshakable kinship with all of existence. How would your day change if you looked at the next person you see and recognized yourself? This profound sense of connection with the world outside, however, soon revealed a final, hidden frontier. The kinship Leo felt with others did not yet extend to the stranger living within his own skin. His mentor observed this lingering division with a gentle, knowing clarity. "You have learned to see the one life in the tree and in your neighbor," he said one evening as the sky deepened to violet. "But can you find the courage to welcome home the exiled parts of yourself? True oneness is not just an outward embrace, it is the unconditional acceptance of your entire inner world." Leo felt a familiar resistance tighten in his chest. He knew exactly which parts he had spent a lifetime trying to manage, the shadowy tenants in the basement of his own being. There was a deep well of insecurity he masked with quiet competence. There were flashes of a temper he carefully suppressed, fearing it made him a bad person. There was a raw, creative impulse he had long ago locked away as impractical and childish. He had been at war with these aspects, seeing them as flaws to be fixed, enemies to be defeated. His mentor invited him to try a different way, a radical act of internal hospitality. "Do not try to change these feelings," he advised. "Do not even try to understand them. Simply invite them in, sit quietly, and when you feel that old anxiety arise, do not push it away. Instead, say to it, 'Hello, fear, I feel you, you are allowed to be here.'" This was not an intellectual exercise, it was a felt experience. The first time Leo tried it, a surge of old anger surfaced during a frustrating work call. Instead of swallowing it down and letting it curdle into resentment, he excused himself for a moment. Standing alone, he closed his eyes and turned his attention directly toward the fiery tension in his stomach. "Hello, anger," he whispered inside. "I feel your heat. You are allowed to be here." He did not analyze it or justify it. He simply made space for the raw sensation, holding it in his awareness with the same gentle attention he had learned to give his breath. A remarkable thing happened. The anger, met with this open, non-judgmental presence, did not explode. It softened. It trembled, released a wave of old energy, and then began to dissolve, not because he fought it, but because he finally stopped fighting it. He saw that this anger was not a monster. It was a wounded part of him, a frightened child that had only ever been met with rejection. In offering it compassion, he was not condoning its destructive potential. He was simply acknowledging its existence, and in doing so, he was taking back its power over him. He began to do this with every exiled feeling. When insecurity whispered that he was not good enough, he would pause and say, "Hello, little one. I hear you, you belong here too." He stopped seeing these aspects as flaws and began to see them as lost members of his own inner family, each one carrying a piece of his wholeness. The creative impulse he had locked away was not childish. It was his innate capacity for joy and spontaneity. The fear of failure was not a weakness. It was a profound desire to protect him from pain. By welcoming them all back, he was no longer a house divided against itself. He was becoming a whole ecosystem where every creature, every feeling had its rightful place. This is the final, sacred integration. The light cannot be whole without the shadow, for the shadow defines the light. When you stop fighting the parts of yourself you deem unworthy, you reclaim the very energy you are using to wage that civil war. That energy becomes a profound, unshakable peace. The journey to oneness is not complete until you can look into your own eyes in the mirror and see not a single perfect self, but a vast and welcoming sky, holding every cloud and every star with equal, unconditional love. The world he returned to was the same, yet it was an entirely new world. The hum of his computer was no longer an irritant, but the audible pulse of a vast intelligence at work. The stack of papers on his desk was not a burden, but a constellation of potential connections, each one a point of contact with other lives. Leo discovered that awakening was not an escape from daily life, but a deeper immersion into it. Every mundane action became a doorway back to the present, an opportunity to practice the connection he now knew was real. Eating his breakfast, he no longer consumed it. He met it, he felt the cool weight of the bowl in his hand, saw the vibrant colors of the fruit, and tasted each bite with a slow, deliberate attention. He considered the sun that had warmed the berries, the rain that had swelled the grain, the countless hands that had planted, harvested, and transported this food to his table. The simple act of a meal became a silent communion with the entire world, a moment of profound gratitude for a web of life that sustained him. At work, a difficult conversation was no longer a battle between two separate selves. He listened to his colleague not as an opponent but as a current in the same river. He felt the man's frustration not as a personal attack but as a turbulence in the shared field of their interaction. Responding from this place, his words were calmer, his presence more steady. He was not trying to win. He was participating in a dance, sometimes awkward, sometimes graceful, but always a dance of one life with itself. The pressure to perform dissolved into a simple intention to contribute, to offer his unique shape to the ever-moving ocean. Even walking through a crowded city street was transformed. The noise was no longer a chaotic assault. It was a symphony of existence, the collective hum of 10,000 stories unfolding at once. He did not feel separate from the crowd. He felt like its heartbeat. The brief, accidental meeting of eyes with a stranger was no longer awkward, but a silent recognition, a flicker of the same knowing light passing between two temporary forms. He was not a lonely island anymore. He was the ocean, and every person he passed was another wave, rising and falling in the same great body. This is the final, quiet miracle. The sacred is not found in a secluded temple, but in the texture of your morning toast. Peace is not a destination to reach, but a manner of traveling. When you know you are the ocean, you stop fearing the waves. Every moment, no matter how ordinary, is saturated with meaning because it is an expression of the whole, and you are no longer a visitor to it, but the very life of it, breathing, walking, and waking up to itself. And so, the man who once felt utterly alone now walks through a world that is fundamentally, unshakably his own. Leo's journey did not require him to move to a mountaintop or abandon his responsibilities. The transformation occurred in the quiet spaces between his old habits, in a series of gentle turnings. He turned from the story in his head to the feeling in his body. He turned from judgment of others to a recognition of shared being. He turned from a war with his own inner world to a profound and welcoming peace. The separate self he had spent a lifetime defending was revealed not as a solid entity, but as a collection of thoughts, a persistent whisper of me and mine that had masked a deeper, vaster reality. The key was not to build a better self, but to discover the aware, open space in which all selves arise and fall. This is the heart of the matter. The peace you seek does not lie in the future. It is hidden in the texture of the present moment, waiting just behind your next thought, in the simple, undeniable fact of your own awareness. You are not a wave struggling to stay afloat. You are the ocean, temporarily expressing itself as a wave. This knowing changes everything. It turns struggle into participation, loneliness into communion, and fear into a curiosity that can be held with compassion. The path is open to you right now, in this very breath. You do not need to have all the answers. You only need the willingness to notice, to feel, and to question the story of a separate you. Begin with one conscious breath. Look into the eyes of a stranger and see if you can find yourself there. Welcome a difficult feeling not as an enemy, but as a lost part of you coming home. Your own awakening is waiting, not as a distant dream, but as the living truth of your being. We would love to hear from you. What did this story stir in your own heart? Where do you feel the walls of separation in your life? Share your questions or your moments of connection in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation as one community exploring the greatest mystery of all.